On the small black and white screen of the hidden camera, an unknown woman lifted a spoon to Carlo Moretti's mouth as if she had done it 100 times before. Dante watched in silence. His father, who trusted almost no one, opened his mouth without protest. His mother sat beside him in the yellow kitchen light, one hand over the woman's wrist, smiling in a way Dante had not seen in months. There was soup on the stove, fresh bread on the table, a folded blanket over the back of the chair, and in the quiet frame of that old house, under the ticking clock and the weak light of a winter afternoon, the stranger looked less like a guest and more like family. That was what unsettled him. Not the food, not the smile, not even the fact that she had entered the Moretti home without his permission. What unsettled him was how naturally she belonged there. Dante leaned back in the leather chair of his office and watched the screen again. The room around him was dim, wide, and expensive. Dark wood walls, a painting in a gold frame, a bar cart with crystal glasses that no one touched unless he allowed it. Heavy curtains sealed out the city, but the sound of rain still moved through the old windows like a low warning. A green-shaded lamp cut a pool of light over his desk. Smoke from a half-burned cigar climbed in a thin gray line and disappeared into shadow. Nothing in that room was warm. He looked at the screen again. The woman wore a plain gray coat, slightly wet at the shoulders from the rain, and a dark scarf wrapped close around her throat. No jewelry, no bright lipstick, no purse large enough to hide anything dangerous. Her hair was pinned back in a simple way that made her look older from some angles and younger from others. When she turned, the camera caught her profile for a second. Calm mouth, tired eyes, face without vanity, a face that would disappear in a crowd. Dante did not like people who disappeared in crowds. "She came again today," said Luca, who stood near the door with his hands folded in front of him. He was one of Dante's oldest men, tall and solid, dressed in a black suit that fit him like armor. "Third time this week." Dante kept his eyes on the screen. "How long?" 2 hours, maybe a little more. "And my parents let her in?" "Yes." That answer stayed in the room. Dante turned down the volume, though there had barely been any sound. His father hated cameras. His mother hated guards standing too close. But after Carlo's fall in the garden last spring, Dante had arranged quiet surveillance on the old house anyway. Tiny lenses in corners, a camera at the front gate, a microphone in the hallway that almost never picked up more than coughs, radio music, or the scrape of chairs. He had called it protection. Now it felt like he had discovered an intrusion. Or worse, an opening. "She has a name?" Dante asked. "Sofia Bellini," Luca said. 32, lives alone in the East Quarter, no husband, no children, works part-time at a neighborhood pharmacy, and cleans at St. Agnes Clinic 3 nights a week. Dante finally looked away from the screen. His face was hard even in stillness. He was only 38, but power had made him look older around the eyes. He wore a charcoal suit with a black shirt, no tie, one sleeve pushed slightly back to reveal a watch that cost more than most people earned in a year. His dark hair was neat. His hands were steady. His expression gave away almost nothing. "Debt?" he asked. "Some. Rent is always late by a few days. Nothing major." "Family?" "Both parents dead." "How?" Luca hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Mother from illness. Father less than a year later. Heart failure, according to records." Dante leaned forward and tapped ash into the tray. He watched the woman on the screen rise from the table and move toward the stove. She tasted the soup, added salt, then wiped the spoon clean before setting it aside. Small habit, careful habit, the kind that came from doing things for people, not performing them. She said something to his mother. Rosa laughed. Dante hated that the sound of his mother's laughter was now attached to a stranger. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the city. It was a wet December evening, the kind that turned every street black and shining. By now, the neon signs near the river would be glowing on the pavement. Men in long coats would be slipping in and out of jazz clubs. Cars with tinted windows would be crossing the old bridge toward Dante's district, where power hid itself behind silence and polished stone. He rose from his chair and crossed to the window. Below, in the courtyard of the Moretti building, black cars waited in careful lines. Their hoods gleamed under rain. 2 guards stood by the gate without moving. One held an umbrella and did not use it. Everything in Dante's world was ordered, watched, controlled. That was the point. He had built his life on the simple truth that kindness had a price and closeness was never innocent. When he was 14, he saw a man kiss his uncle on both cheeks and then sell his location the same night. When he was 19, a woman cried in front of his father and later passed numbers to a rival crew. When he was 27, one of his own captains sat at his table, drank his whiskey, and tried to poison his accountant 3 days later. Since then, Dante had trusted money, patterns, fear, and proof. He did not trust warmth. Warmth came with motives. On the screen, Sophia bent to help Carlo stand. Dante watched the care in her hands. She did not rush him. She did not take over. She waited until his father chose to move, then steadied him only when needed. Carlo's pride had always been sharper than his temper. The old man would rather fall than be handled like a weak thing, yet he let her help. "Who introduced her?" Dante asked. "We don't know yet." "You don't know," Dante corrected softly. Luca lowered his head. "No." Dante turned from the window. "Find out." Luca nodded once and left the room. For a while, Dante stood alone in the hush of the office, listening to rain brush against the glass. Then he picked up the remote and enlarged the image until the grain became rough and the kitchen filled the screen. His mother looked older than she did in person. The camera was cruel like that. It flattened the skin, caught every silver strand, every little pause between movements. Rosa Moretti had once hosted ministers and judges at long candlelit tables without ever raising her voice. Now her wrists were thin, and her left shoulder stiffened when the weather changed. Yet even in age, she carried a kind of quiet elegance. Tonight she wore a cream cardigan buttoned to the throat and small pearl earrings she never removed. His father had refused his usual jacket. Carlo sat in a white shirt, sleeves rolled, suspenders loose, the old lion reduced but not erased. His hair had gone almost completely white. His hands still looked like they could break a man's nose. The woman moved between them with humble ease. There was another detail Dante did not like. She never looked around the house with greed. Most people did, even people who pretended not to. They noticed the old silver frame on the piano, the carved cabinet from Palermo, the antique clock above the stove, the paintings in the hallway. They saw legacy. They smelled value. But Sophia did not let her eyes linger on objects. She looked at people. That, too, could be a strategy. At 8:30, Dante left the office. His car took him through the wet city in a slow black glide. He sat in the back seat while water ran across the windows and blurred the lights into gold, red, and ghost blue lines. He passed the jazz club he owned near the river, where a trumpet was spilling loneliness into the doorway. He passed the tailor shop that laundered cash behind silk curtains. He passed St. Clement's, where old women still lit candles for dead husbands and foolish sons. The city bent around him like it knew better than to touch. By the time he reached his parents' neighborhood, the rain had softened into mist. Their house stood on a narrow street lined with iron fences and bare trees, smaller than his mansion, older, stubbornly unchanged. It was the house where he had grown up, where his father once counted envelopes at the dining table while his mother pretended not to notice. Dante had tried for years to move them into safer, finer property. They refused every time. He stayed in the car and watched through the side window. Sophia came out at exactly 8:43, carrying an empty food container and a folded umbrella. The porch light caught her face for a moment, not beautiful in the polished magazine sense, but there was something steady in it, something unguarded and tired and real. Rosa followed her to the door. Even from the car, Dante could see his mother touch the woman's cheek with surprising tenderness. Carlo appeared behind her and handed Sophia a wrapped parcel. The woman shook her head and tried to refuse. Rosa insisted. Sophia accepted only after a pause, then pressed the parcel back into Rosa's hands and pointed inside, toward the house, as if saying they should keep it. Then she smiled a small, sad smile and walked into the mist. Dante opened the door before his driver could stop him. He stepped out into the cold, shoes shining on wet pavement, coat collar turned up against the weather. The woman had already reached the corner. She did not look back. "Boss," his driver said, but Dante was not listening. He looked up at his parents' lit window, then down the empty street where Sophia Bellini had disappeared. He did not know yet whether she was clever, dangerous, broken, or honest. He only knew one thing with certainty. She had entered the only part of his life that still felt untouchable. And tomorrow, he would begin to test her. The first test began with money. In Dante Moretti's world, everything began with money sooner or later. By noon the next day, the rain had thinned into a gray mist that clung to the city like breath on cold glass. The sky over the river was low and metallic. Black cars moved through narrow streets lined with stone facades, Shuttered bakeries, butcher shops with red awnings, and old apartment buildings whose balconies looked like tired hands gripping the air. The city never truly dried in winter. Water stayed in the seams of it, in the cracks between cobblestones, in the collars of men's coats, in the smell of wet wool, diesel, coffee, smoke, and old fear. Dante sat in the back of his car and watched the neighborhood slide by. He wore a dark wool overcoat over a black suit, gloves folded in one hand, his face still and unreadable. Beside him lay a slim leather envelope. Inside, it was enough cash to pay 6 months of rent in Sofia Bellini's district, maybe more. Not a fortune, not enough to be dramatic, just enough to test a person's reflex. Greed did not need millions. It only needed a crack. He had chosen the amount carefully. Not insultingly small, not suspiciously large, human-sized temptation. As the car approached his parents' street, Dante's driver glanced in the mirror. Same position as last night? Yes. The car rolled to a stop half a block away from the old house. The windows were tinted, the engine soft, the body polished to a dark shine that reflected the pale weather. From inside, Dante could see the gate, the front steps, the yellow curtains in the kitchen. 2 of his men were already nearby in plain clothes. One sat in a parked van farther down the road. Another lingered under the striped awning of a closed tobacco shop, smoking like he had nowhere else to be. None of them looked like guards. Everything about Dante's life depended on the appearance of normal things. At 1:10, Sofia arrived. She came on foot, scarf wrapped high against the cold, carrying 2 canvas bags heavy with groceries. She wore the same gray coat as the day before, neatly brushed but frayed at one cuff. Her shoes were clean, though not new. She moved with a quiet economy, careful not to waste energy, a person who counted hours, steps, coins. Even from the car, Dante could tell she was tired. There was a faint drag in her shoulders, the kind that came from work done late and sleep cut short. Yet when Rosa opened the front door, Sofia's whole face changed. The tiredness did not vanish, but it softened, warmed. She smiled like someone reaching the edge of something familiar. His mother touched her arm. They went inside together. Dante checked his watch. Now, he said. Luca stepped out of the parked van 2 doors down. He crossed the street carrying a paper bakery box and knocked on the Moretti door like an old family messenger. Dante had given him exact instructions. He was to say the package came from Dante, leave the envelope in Rosa's hands, and watch without pressing too hard. No threats, no pressure, only gratitude wrapped in quiet money. Simple. Dante watched through the camera feed on the tablet in his lap. The image flickered once, then steadied. The hidden lens above the kitchen cabinet showed Sofia unpacking groceries, while Rosa fussed over the flowers she had brought. White carnations, cheap ones, but fresh. Carlo sat near the table in a heavy cardigan, reading glasses low on his nose, pretending to study the newspaper, though Dante could see he had not turned the page in several minutes. Then Luca entered the frame. Rosa looked surprised. Carlo looked annoyed, which for him was close to normal. Luca set down the bakery box, nodded respectfully, and passed the envelope to Rosa. Even through the weak audio, Dante could hear the general shape of the words. From Dante. A small thank you. For the lady who has been helping. Sofia stopped unpacking. For the first time since Dante had seen her, real discomfort crossed her face. She wiped her hands on a dish towel before Rosa could pass the envelope to her. That small detail caught his attention. She would not touch money with wet fingers, even now. Habit again, respect again, or performance so polished it had become second nature. Rosa smiled and offered it. Sofia shook her head at once. Dante leaned back, expression unchanged. Not enough, he thought. Refusal on the first offer meant nothing. Pride was cheap. Most people wanted to be asked twice. They wanted the scene of reluctance. They wanted moral lighting before the deal. On screen, Rosa insisted more strongly. Carlo added something from the table. His old hand lifted once in a rough motion, as if saying, "Take it. Enough nonsense." Sofia took the envelope at last. Dante waited. She did not open it. Instead, she looked at Rosa, then at Carlo, then set the envelope carefully on the table between them, as if it were something alive and inconvenient. She said a few quiet words. Rosa frowned with concern. Sofia pointed toward the hallway where Carlo's medicine was kept, then toward the old radiator by the window. Dante turned the volume higher. "It should go to the house," Sofia was saying. The heat is weak in the back room, and he needs the new prescription. Please. I did not help for money. There was no drama in her voice, no moral performance. She sounded almost embarrassed for having to say it. Carlo muttered something sharp, but Rosa reached across the table and took Sophia's hand. On screen, Sophia smiled again, softer this time, and pushed the envelope closer to Rosa. Dante lowered the volume. He stared at the image for several seconds after Luca had left. Then he locked the tablet screen and looked out through the car window at the old house standing under the pale sky. She gave it back? The driver asked carefully. Dante did not answer right away. Not exactly, he said at last. She redirected it. Maybe she's being careful. Everyone is careful. He watched the upstairs curtain move slightly. Maybe his mother passing by. Maybe nothing. In that house, even the light seemed older than the rest of the city. Warmer, less efficient. It irritated him more than it comforted him. A woman who accepted the money too quickly would have fit the pattern. A woman who refused with a speech would also have fit the pattern. But this halfway refusal, this refusal that still thought first of medicine, heating, practical need, did not settle neatly into any category he trusted. That made her harder, not easier. The second test came 3 days later. By then the city had dropped into a deeper cold. The river carried a sheet of iron-colored light beneath low cloud. Dante spent the morning in his riverfront club, a place that looked respectable by day and expensive by night. Velvet booths, dark mirrors, brass lamps, a piano under a dust cover until evening. By midnight, it would be full of low voices, old whiskey, and the slow animal pulse of jazz. By noon, it belonged to silence, paperwork, and men who spoke softly because shouting in Dante's presence always felt foolish. He sat at a corner table rather than his office, reviewing numbers while a record played somewhere behind the bar. Luca stood beside him. I want her insulted, Dante said. Luca's face did not change. In front of them? Yes. That could upset your mother. It will. Luca waited. Dante lifted his eyes from the ledger. She has handled generosity. Now I want to see how she handles humiliation. There's a difference between kindness when people thank you and kindness when they make you feel small. Luca nodded once. How far? Not filthy. Not cruel for spectacle. Just enough to close the door in her face. Luca understood the language beneath the words. Dante did not need shouting. He needed pressure placed precisely. A suggestion that Sophia was opportunistic. A hint that she was circling inheritance. A question asked in a tone meant to stain her in the room. That afternoon, Dante watched again from the hidden feed. The kitchen was brighter than the weather outside. Sophia had brought chicken broth and bread. Rosa was sitting at the table peeling pears with a small silver knife while Carlo pretended not to listen to the radio. Sophia moved around them as if she knew where everything belonged now. She hung her scarf on the same chair. She checked the kettle without asking. She refilled the sugar bowl from a packet in her bag because she had noticed, at some earlier visit, that it was always nearly empty. Dante saw things like that. He could not stop seeing them. Then came the knock at the door. This time it was not Luca. It was Marco, one of Dante's younger men, handsome in a careless way, dressed as if money came too easily to him. He entered with false familiarity and the easy rudeness of a relative who believed blood excused bad manners. At first, Sophia only looked confused. Marco smiled too much. He greeted Rosa and Carlo, then turned to Sophia with polite poison in his voice. So this is the one, he said. The helper. Rosa stiffened at once. Carlo lowered his paper. Sophia stood very still by the counter, one hand resting on the neck of the olive oil bottle. Marco looked around the kitchen. I hear you've made yourself useful. Smart. Old people get lonely. Houses like this make people ambitious. Dante watched for the first crack in her face. It came, but not as greed or panic. It came as hurt. A quiet hurt. The kind a person tries to hide because they have had enough of it in life already. I think you misunderstand, Sophia said. Marco gave a light laugh. Do I? There's always a story. Kind women, sick parents, one foot in the door. Rosa told him sharply to leave. Carlo swore under his breath, but the damage had been done. The accusation hung in the yellow kitchen like bad smoke. Sophia did not defend herself with outrage. She did not appeal to sympathy. She did not try to win the room with tears. Instead, she placed the bread on the table, turned off the stove under the soup, and took off the apron she had been using. I'm sorry, she said softly to Rosa and Carlo, as if she were the one who had caused shame. I never wanted trouble in your home. Her chin trembled once. Only once. Then she picked up her coat. Rosa rose immediately and caught her by the sleeve. Carlo pushed his chair back with visible effort, furious now in a way Dante had not seen in years. For one dangerous second, Dante thought his father might strike Marco with the cane leaning by the wall. But Sofia touched Rosa's hand, then Carlo's shoulder, calming them both with the kind of instinct that came from surviving harder rooms than this one. She left. Marco followed a minute later under Rosa's cold stare. Dante killed the audio and sat very still in his car. The street outside was blue with early dusk. A dog barked somewhere far off. Lights came on behind curtains, one house at a time. He expected relief, clarity, a sense that the test had revealed something useful. Instead, he felt only an unpleasant heaviness in his chest, like a door closing in the wrong place. She'll stay away now, the driver said. Dante looked toward the darkening gate. Maybe, he said, but the next evening, just after sunset, the camera at the front porch flickered to life. Sofia stood outside in the cold with 2 containers in her hands. She did not knock. She placed the food carefully by the door, covered it with a folded cloth against the damp, and set a handwritten note on top. Then she stepped back, looked once at the lit window, and walked away before anyone could open the door. Dante stared at the screen. The note was too small to read from the camera, for reasons he did not fully understand. That made it worse, because now there was one more thing he did not know. One more quiet truth left outside his reach, warming on his parents' porch in the winter dark. The third test began with weakness. Not Sofia's, his father's. Dante hated that part of the plan before it even began, though he would never have admitted it aloud. There were lines in his mind he liked to imagine he would never cross, and one of them involved turning his own blood into bait. But suspicion had a patient voice. It told him that truth was expensive. It reminded him that if Sofia Bellini was playing a long game, then a simple insult and an envelope of money would never be enough to expose her. Some people could refuse cash, some people could survive shame, but very few could resist advantage in a crisis. So he arranged a crisis. The winter morning arrived colorless and mean. Low cloud pressed over the city. The wind dragged through the streets like something searching. In the wealthy quarter, black gates remained closed and polished cars breathed steam into the air. In the older neighborhoods, women pulled scarves higher over their mouths, shopkeepers rubbed their hands, and puddles in the gutters turned to sheets of dark ice. The city looked carved from wet stone. Dante stood in the dining room of his mansion, one hand on the back of a chair, while breakfast cooled untouched on the table. The room around him was grand in the old way. Not loud luxury, not glitter. The wealth here was heavier than that, older than that. Walnut walls, oil portraits, a chandelier that glowed like tired gold, a long table polished to the point of reflection, 2 silver candlesticks that had belonged to his grandfather, though nobody remembered whether the story behind them was noble or stolen. Beyond the tall windows, bare branches moved against the gray morning. Luca entered without sound, as always. "It's set," he said. Dante nodded once. "He knows what to do?" "Yes. Your father was not pleased. He's never pleased. Luca let that pass. Your mother thinks the doctor wants new tests." Dante turned his face slightly, enough for Luca to see the cold line in his profile. Good. He hated lying to Rosa more than he hated manipulating Carlo. His father would curse him later if he guessed the truth. His mother would only go quiet, and Dante had learned long ago that her silence was harder to bear. Still, by 10:30, the stage was ready. Carlo would skip breakfast under the excuse of fasting for tests. One of Dante's physicians, loyal and discreet, would visit the house at noon and privately instruct Carlo to stand too quickly after taking the old medication that sometimes made him dizzy. Not enough to do real harm, just enough to create alarm. Just enough to pull Sofia into a moment where instinct mattered more than appearance. Dante told himself again that nothing truly dangerous would happen. He told himself that because he needed to hear it. He arrived near his parents' house shortly before noon, not in his usual car this time, but in a dark sedan without the family plates. He sat in the back seat, a black coat open at the throat, gloves in one hand, face unreadable. The dashboard clock ticked forward. The windows held the pale blur of the street. At 11:53, Sofia appeared. She carried only one bag today. No flowers, no extra parcels. She walked faster than usual, shoulders bent slightly against the wind, hair lifting loose at her temple. Her face looked more tired than before. There were shadows beneath her eyes. She had probably come straight from the pharmacy. Still, when Rosa opened the door, Sophia's expression gentled immediately, and the old familiar ache touched Dante's chest again, the irritation of watching a stranger cross a threshold that even he no longer crossed so easily. He opened the tablet feed. Inside, the kitchen light painted everything in warm gold. It always struck him, the contrast between his world and theirs. His rooms were bigger, richer, colder. Their kitchen was narrow, slightly worn, full of soft use. A kettle stained at the base, a cracked blue bowl his mother refused to replace, a calendar with saints' days circled in red ink, the old radio humming low, a life reduced by age but not emptied of shape. Sophia put her hand at once on Carlo's shoulder. He looked pale, which was not entirely acting. Rosa fussed over the stove, nervous already. The physician had just left. The script was moving. Dante watched Sophia kneel by his father's chair. She spoke to him quietly, not as a nurse would, not as a servant would, but with a respectful directness Carlo seemed to accept from her more than from anyone else. She touched his wrist, then his forehead. She asked when he had last eaten. Carlo grumbled. Even through the weak microphone, Dante could hear enough. "Nothing this morning," Rosa said. Sophia looked up sharply. "Nothing?" There it was, that quick flare of concern. Not for herself, not for how she looked, only concern. She rose and crossed to the cupboard as if she had every right to open it. She pulled out a glass, reached for sugar, then stopped when Carlo tried to stand on his own. He got up too fast. The stumble was real. His hand missed the edge of the table. The chair scraped back. Rosa cried out. Carlo swayed once, heavily, then hit the floor with a sickening sound that was not staged enough for Dante's liking. Dante was out of the car before he realized he had moved. But he stopped himself at the gate and looked through the iron bars instead. Inside the house, the camera angle shuddered as the hidden feed adjusted to motion. Sophia was already on the floor beside Carlo. She had one arm behind his shoulders, the other under his wrist, steadying him, speaking low and fast without panic. Rosa was trembling visibly. Sophia looked up and said something sharp but calm that froze Rosa in place. Then she reached for the phone on the wall. An ambulance? No delay, no performance, no glance around to see who might be watching, just action. Dante stood outside in the cold with one hand on the wet iron gate, feeling suddenly like an intruder outside his own blood. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. They felt longer. By the time Dante entered the house, Sophia and the medics were lifting Carlo onto the stretcher. Rosa's face had gone wax pale. Her hands shook so badly she could not button her coat. Sophia buttoned it for her without speaking, fingers quick despite the cold. Then Sophia looked up and saw Dante. For the first time since this began, their eyes met without glass, without distance, without surveillance between them. She knew him at once, not because he had introduced himself, not because anyone said his name. The city knew Dante Moretti in the way prey knows weather. He did not need introduction. He carried authority like a drawn curtain, heavy, expensive, impossible to ignore. Sophia's gaze held for 1 second too long, and in that second Dante searched for fear, greed, calculation. He found only recognition and urgency. "Your mother needs her medicine," she said. "The small white bottle in the hallway cabinet, and a shawl. The hospital will be cold." Then she turned away from him and followed the stretcher outside. Dante stood motionless in the kitchen. The yellow light, the bowl of untouched broth, his father's cane on the floor, the half-opened sugar tin, his mother's chair pushed back. All of it looked suddenly fragile, mortal, almost humble. For one strange instant, he was no longer the man other men stepped aside for. He was simply a son in a room where time had begun to thin. He took the medicine and shawl. At the hospital, everything looked cruel under fluorescent light. The private clinic Dante had chosen was discreet and expensive, all polished floors and frosted glass, but no amount of money softened the smell of antiseptic or the sound of distant coughing. Winter light pressed weakly through the tall windows of the reception hall. Nurses moved quickly in pale shoes. An old man in a wheelchair stared at nothing near the elevator. Somewhere, a machine kept time with a series of indifferent beeps. Carlo was taken for tests. Rosa sat in a chair with both hands clasped in her lap. Her pearl earrings looked too delicate in that white place. Her breathing had gone shallow. Sophia sat beside her, one hand covering Rosa's knuckles, speaking in a steady murmur that seemed to borrow calm from somewhere deeper than comfort. Dante remained standing a few feet away. He had bodyguards in the corridor, a doctor in his pocket, half the building attentive to his presence. Yet the center of the room was not his. It belonged to the woman in the plain coat keeping his mother from falling apart. When the admitting clerk approached with a careful expression and a folder in hand, Dante was already reaching for his wallet. He stopped because Sophia moved first. "There's an imaging fee not covered in advance," the clerk said, uncomfortable under Dante's gaze. "We need—" Sophia had already opened her bag. It was a worn brown bag with a broken lining near the zipper. Dante saw her take out a folded envelope held together by a rubber band. Notes. Not many. Small denominations, counted and recounted by someone who could not afford mistakes. She did not look at him. "Take this," she said. The clerk blinked, confused. "Miss, I'm sure." "Take it," Sophia repeated. "Do the test." Dante stepped forward, cold at once. "Put that away." Now she looked at him. Up close, he could see more clearly what the cameras had missed. She was younger than the tiredness in her face suggested, and stronger than her slight frame seemed. Her eyes were not soft in the foolish sense. They were observant, level, bruised by life but not bent by it. There was dignity in the way she stood, even here under white hospital light with cheap gloves in her pocket and rent money in her hand. "Your father should not wait," she said. "He won't." "Then let them do the test." I said, "Put it away." Something in his voice turned the air sharp. Rosa looked between them with worry. The clerk took a careful step back. Sophia's fingers tightened once around the notes. Dante could almost see the arithmetic behind her eyes. Rent, food, heat, the next week, the next month. Then she placed the money on the counter anyway. The sound of it landing there was small, almost nothing. But to Dante, it hit harder than a slammed door. "I didn't bring it for him," she said quietly. "I brought it because people get sick at bad times. No accusation, no performance, just truth laid flat between them." Dante paid the fee himself, of course, 10 times over if he wanted. The clerk nearly tripped over apologies. The money was returned, but the moment did not undo itself. He had seen what mattered, when there was no audience worth impressing, when worry was immediate and ugly and unglamorous. Sophia still chose to give up what she could not spare. An hour later, the doctor emerged with good news. Dizziness, minor strain from the fall, no fracture, no stroke, rest, fluids, observation. Rosa nearly cried from relief. Carlo, once wheeled back out, was angry at everyone in the room, which reassured Dante more than the doctor's words. Sophia laughed under her breath for the first time that day. The sound caught him off guard. It was not a pretty laugh, not cultivated. It carried fatigue, relief, and something almost private, as if she had forgotten for a second who stood nearby. Carlo heard it too and grumbled that the hospital soup smelled like mop water. Sophia told him that was the first sensible thing he had said all day. Even Dante's mother smiled. That evening, outside the hospital entrance, winter pressed in blue and hard. Headlights slid across the wet pavement. The city beyond the private gates looked distant and hungry. A driver held the rear door of Dante's car open for Rosa. Another stood ready with Carlo's blanket. Sophia adjusted her scarf and turned to leave on foot. Dante stepped into her path. Up close, under the steel-colored sky, his presence seemed larger than it had in the kitchen. The black coat, the polished shoes, the face men feared because it rarely needed to rise above calm. Rain had darkened his hair at the temples. The streetlight sharpened the planes of his expression, making him look almost sculpted from the same cold material as the city. "You paid with rent money," he said. She did not answer at first. "I said no," he added, "and I heard you." "Then why?" She looked past him once toward the road, where buses hissed and disappeared into the dark. Then her eyes came back to his. "Because they were frightened," she said, "and because your mother was shaking, and because your father is too proud to admit when he feels weak, and because in that moment, arguing about who should pay mattered less than helping." Dante studied her face. "You speak as if you know them." "I do know them." That answer landed deeper than she could have known. The guards near the car pretended not to listen. Rosa was inside now, visible only as a pale outline through the tinted rear window. Carlo was muttering to the driver. The hospital lights glowed behind them like a false dawn. Dante lowered his voice. "Why are you doing this?" For a second, he thought she might finally tell him the hidden thing: money, revenge, inheritance, guilt, leverage, some old family history, not yet uncovered. Instead, she said, "Because they shouldn't be alone." Then she stepped around him and walked into the winter night before he could stop her. Dante stood on the hospital steps and watched until the darkness swallowed her. That should have ended something. Instead, it opened a door he could no longer close. After the hospital night, Dante told himself he would stop. He did not. For 2 days, he avoided his parents' house and watched only through reports. Carlo was recovering. Rosa had resumed her small routines. Sophia had returned the very next afternoon with broth, oranges, and a thicker pair of slippers for his father because the old ones had no grip on the polished hall floor. She had scolded Carlo for trying to carry wood to the back room. She had mended a loose button on Rosa's winter coat while the kettle boiled. She had opened windows for 10 minutes despite the cold because sick rooms need new air. She had done all of it without once mentioning the hospital, the money, or Dante. That, more than anything, kept him restless. If she had used the moment to become important, he would have understood it. If she had repeated her sacrifice in front of Rosa, if she had allowed the old couple to praise her, if she had somehow turned the hospital into currency, it would have settled into a shape he recognized. But Sophia did none of that. She moved through the house as before, quiet, observant, useful, almost painfully untheatrical. Dante sat late one evening in the library of his mansion, with a glass of untouched whiskey near his hand, and the city spread in broken lights beyond the tall windows. The room smelled of leather, ash, and old paper. Shelves climbed into shadow. A bronze lamp threw a warm circle onto the desk, but warmth in that house never traveled far. It died in corners. It vanished in high ceilings and long corridors where servants moved with lowered eyes and footsteps, softened by carpets, imported generations earlier by men who had understood the power of luxury and silence together. Luca stood across from him, waiting. She refused the money. She stayed after the insult. She paid at the hospital, Dante said, as if laying evidence in a case. And still I know nothing. You know some things, Luca said carefully. Dante lifted his eyes. She cares for them, Luca said. Whether or not we understand why. Dante's mouth hardened. People always care for a reason. He rose and crossed to the window. Rain had returned, thin and silver in the courtyard lights. Below, 2 black cars idled at the gate. One of his men smoked under the stone archway, ember pulsing red in the dark. The Empire looked calm from above, ordered, controlled. But Dante had learned long ago that disorder often entered dressed as innocence. What does she need? He asked. Luca had anticipated the question. Steadier work, better pay, security. Dante turned slightly. She cleans at the clinic 3 nights a week, Luca went on. The pharmacy cut her hours last month. Rent is higher than she can manage comfortably. The landlord has been patient, but patience ends. There, Dante said softly. Luca did not answer. There it was. Not proof, not yet, but pressure. Life leaning on her from all sides. Bills, exhaustion, instability. People like Sophia did not dream of luxury. They dreamed of not falling. That could be exploited. It could also reveal truth. Offer a person rescue, and you saw what mattered more to them than relief. Dante turned back from the window, set up the job. Within 48 hours, an offer appeared. It came through a respectable chain of events, distant enough from the Moretti name to seem accidental. An administrator from one of Dante's charity foundations contacted Sophia about a position in a private residence uptown. Light, household management, elder support coordination, regular hours, higher salary, housing support included. No grime of clinic floors, no juggling shifts, no fear of rent. It was not an extravagant offer. That would have frightened her. It was a believable lifeline. Dante arranged to hear the conversation through a line he should not have had. He listened from the back office of his jazz club while evening gathered over the river. Downstairs, the room was waking into its night shape, glasses being polished, tables set, a trumpet warming up somewhere in the red half-dark. Velvet curtains drank the light. Brass lamps glowed low and intimate. Smoke from the kitchen drifted up through the service stairwell. By midnight, the club would hum with judges, smugglers, politicians, and lonely women in silk. But in the office above, where Dante stood by the window with one hand in his coat pocket, there was only shadow and Sophia's voice. She sounded cautious at first, then astonished, then silent. The woman making the offer explained the terms. A room, better money, predictable hours, a family in the northern district, elderly aunt, respectful environment, immediate start if desired. Dante closed his eyes briefly and pictured Sophia hearing it in her small apartment. He pictured unpaid bills in a drawer, shoes by the radiator, fatigue pressing at the back of her skull. He pictured the choice opening in front of her like a lit doorway in winter. "Yes," she said at last, though faintly. "I understand." Her voice held something he had not heard before. Hope, for reasons he did not welcome, that disturbed him. He expected satisfaction. Instead, he felt a strange resistance, as if some part of him had wanted her to turn it down before even hearing the full offer. He straightened and reminded himself what this was. A test. Necessary. Rational. Nothing more. "When will she answer?" he asked after the call ended. "Tomorrow," Luca said. That night Dante drove past his parents' house and did not stop. He told himself he had no reason to go in, yet he slowed enough to see the warm square of the kitchen window and 3 shadows moving within it. One tall and old, one slight and old, one not family, though somehow already belonging to the pattern. The next day passed like a held breath. Dante had meetings at the port, then lunch with a councilman who laughed too loudly, then an argument over missing numbers that ended with one of his captains leaving pale and careful. He handled every matter with his usual precision. His voice remained level, his posture remained loose. No one in the room would have guessed that, beneath the surface, part of his mind was fixed elsewhere on a small apartment in the East Quarter, and a woman deciding whether to leave his parents behind. By late afternoon, Luca entered his office without knocking. "She asked for a day," he said. Dante looked up from the papers in front of him. "A day?" "She said she needs to think." The irritation that moved through him was out of proportion, which only made it worse. About what? Luca did not answer because there was nothing useful to say. About everything, obviously. About survival, about loyalty, about loss, about whether one kind of duty should be traded for another. Dante rose so abruptly the chair legs scraped the wood. At dusk he went himself. Not into the house. He was not ready for that. Instead, he stood in shadow across the street beneath the dead branches of an elm tree, collar turned up, hands gloved against the wind. The city had become all black glass and reflected lamps. Rain from earlier had left the road glossy as lacquer. A bus sighed past at the corner. Somewhere nearby, a radio played old swing music through a cracked speaker. Inside the Moretti house, supper light burned warm. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see Rosa at the table, Sophia beside her, Carlo in his usual chair pretending to be more recovered than he was. He could not hear their words, but he watched Sophia speak slowly, her hands folded, her face troubled in a way he had not yet seen. Rosa reached across and touched her wrist. Carlo's expression darkened with concentration. Then Sophia bowed her head. Dante knew in that instant that she was telling them the job, the possible move, the practical rescue laid before her. He should have felt vindicated. The test had reached its final shape. Now he would see what counted more, better life or old kindness. Instead, he stood in the cold and felt, with growing clarity, that he had made himself the architect of a wound he did not want to witness. Later, after Sophia left, Dante entered the house at last. Rosa was in the front room near the fire, though the flame had burned low. The lamps were shaded amber. Shadows from the iron grate moved slowly across the carpet and the carved legs of the furniture. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. His mother sat very straight in her armchair, hands clasped over a folded handkerchief. She looked up when he came in. "You choose strange hours to visit," she said. He kissed her cheek. Her skin felt cool. "Where's father?" Pretending not to be upset in the study, Dante remained standing. Rosa studied him for a long moment, and for a second he saw the woman she had once been at the center of large rooms, reading men faster than they read themselves. "She has been offered work," Rosa said quietly. "I know." His mother's expression changed very little, but something in the room sharpened. "Do you?" "She told you." "She did." "And?" Rosa unfolded and refolded the handkerchief. "She did not want to hurt us." Dante looked toward the dark window. "Hurt you," he repeated, as if testing the phrase. "She is kind," Rosa said. "You say it like a suspicious thing." He did not answer. Rosa's gaze rested on him with painful steadiness. "Do you know what loneliness sounds like, Dante?" He almost laughed. "Almost. I hear plenty of things." "No," she said, still quiet. "I mean in a house, in old age, when the days grow smaller, when your husband forgets where he put his glasses, and pretends he isn't afraid, when your son sends guards and flowers and expensive doctors but rarely himself, When the walls begin to feel louder than the people, each sentence landed without force and cut deeper because of it. Dante's face did not change, but he felt the blow. Sophia brings noise back into the rooms, Rosa said. Not loud noise, life. The kettle, the cupboard doors, a second cup on the table, someone asking if we have eaten, someone noticing. She may still leave. Of course she may. Rosa looked down at the handkerchief in her lap. And I would never ask her to remain where life is harder. But do not mistake gratitude for weakness. We love her, in our way. The room was silent but for the ticking clock and the soft hiss from the fire. Dante stayed only 10 minutes longer. He found Carlo in the study holding an unlit cigar and staring at a book he was not reading. His father looked older than usual in the green-shaded lamplight. The shadows under his cheekbones had deepened. Yet when Dante asked, with forced casualness, whether the woman had said when she might leave, Carlo only grunted, "Mind your own affairs," which in Carlo's language meant too much had already been felt. The next morning the answer came. Luca brought it to Dante's breakfast room, where silver covers still sat over untouched food and pale winter light lay across the table like cold milk. She refused. Dante looked up slowly. She thanked them, said the offer was generous. Luca hesitated. Then she said she could not leave people who depend on her. Not now. For a moment Dante said nothing at all. Outside the long windows, a gardener crossed the terrace with head bowed against the wind. Somewhere deeper in the house, a telephone rang and was quickly silenced. The room smelled of coffee gone bitter on the burner. She refused housing? Dante asked. Yes. Regular salary? Yes. Stability? Yes. Luca waited. Dante rose and moved away from the table because sitting still had become impossible. He crossed into the hallway, then the gallery beyond, where ancestral portraits watched with stern, finished faces, men in dark coats, women in pearls, the dead Morettis, builders of silence and appetite. He wondered, not for the first time, whether any of them had ever understood love outside of possession. By evening he could no longer contain the pressure in him. He went to the old house unannounced. Sophia was there, kneeling by the radiator in the back room with a wrench in her hand and a line of concentration between her brows. She had taken off her coat. Her sleeves were rolled. A strand of hair had come loose near her cheek. Rosa was nearby, darning something in a basket. Carlo sat in the doorway, offering unnecessary instructions. When Dante entered, the room changed. Not dramatically. No one gasped. No music stopped. But air shifted. Carlo went silent. Rosa's hands paused in her lap. Sophia looked up from the radiator and slowly rose to her feet. For a second, none of them spoke. Then Dante said, "I'd like a word." Rosa opened her mouth, perhaps to intervene, but Sophia answered first. "Of course." She followed him into the narrow hall. The hall lamp cast a low amber glow that left the ceiling in shadow. The wallpaper was old and darkened with age. Family photographs lined one wall. Dante as a boy in a sailor suit he had hated. Rosa in a garden hat. Carlo beside a black car from another era. The air smelled faintly of starch, soup, and radiator heat. Dante stood with too much stillness, hands at his sides. "You refused the job," he said. "Yes." "Why?" Sophia looked at him as if the answer should be obvious. "Because I already have work. You have scraps, late hours, rent trouble." A flicker crossed her face, not fear, but annoyance. "You've had someone digging through my life." He did not deny it. "That offer would have solved your problems," he said. "It might have changed some of them. You turned down a room, decent pay, and security." "Yes, for two old people who are not related to you." A silence opened. It was not empty. It was full of all the things Dante had not yet said plainly. "What are you after? Why them? Why here? Why do you move through this house like sorrow belongs to you?" Sophia folded the wrench into the cloth in her hand as if giving herself time not to answer badly. "They are not a burden," she said at last. "That is not what I asked. No." Her voice remained calm, but the calm had sharpened. "You keep asking questions as if kindness must defend itself in court." Something hot and immediate moved through him. "In my world, it does." She gave a small, humorless smile. "That much is obvious." He stepped closer, not threatening exactly, but enough to remind anyone else what happened when Dante Moretti closed distance. "You know who I am." "Yes." "And that doesn't frighten you?" "It should." The honesty of that response stalled him for a beat. Sophia looked down the hall toward the back room where his parents waited just out of sight, then back at him. Your mother worries when the tea tin is low, she said quietly. Your father pretends not to need help with his gloves because his hands shake a little in the mornings. The back window lets in cold. The hallway runner curls at the edge and could make him fall. He likes broth with too much pepper even when he complains. She tells the same story about Naples whenever it rains. They are lonely people trying not to look lonely in a beautiful old house. Each detail was precise, intimate, earned. Dante felt his jaw tighten. You speak as if you belong here. No, she said, and for the first time there was pain in her voice. I speak as someone who notices. There's a difference. Then her eyes hardened, not with hatred but with wounded dignity. You send guards and cameras and tests, she said. You watch from the outside and call it protection. But love is not the same thing as control, Mr. Moretti. The words struck him so cleanly that for a second he could not breathe around them. From the back room came the faint clink of china. The house itself seemed to listen. Sophia stepped past him. He did not stop her. That night she did not stay for supper. The next day she did not come at all. And by the second evening, the old house had begun to sound empty enough for Dante to hear what his mother meant. By the second evening without Sophia, the old house felt wrong. It was not dramatic at first. No shattered glass, no emergency call, no raised voices, only small absences, and those were worse. Dante noticed them the way a man notices a missing step only after his body reaches for it in the dark. The kettle in the kitchen was empty. The sugar bowl had not been refilled. His father's medicine sat uncapped near the sink because Rosa had forgotten to tighten it after supper. A scarf still hung on the chair where Sophia usually placed it, though the scarf itself was gone and only the shape of habit remained. Dante stood in the kitchen after visiting at dusk and let the silence settle around him. The room was warm, but the warmth had no movement in it. No second cup drying on the rack, no soft footsteps between stove and table, no quiet voice asking his mother whether she had eaten enough. The clock above the door ticked too loudly. The old refrigerator gave a tired hum. Rain tapped at the window over the sink like fingernails asking to be let in. Rosa sat at the table, shoulders smaller than he remembered. She had tried to act normal all evening. She had asked after business in a voice too careful to be natural. She had insisted the soup was fine, though it was thin and oversalted. Carlo had eaten little and complained less, which worried Dante more than any temper. Now his father was in the front room with the radio on low, pretending to listen to old music. Rosa folded and unfolded a napkin in her lap. She will come when she is ready, she said, though he had not asked. Dante did not answer. His mother looked up at him. In the weak yellow light, her face seemed made of memory and endurance. You wounded her. The words were quiet. The truth in them was not. Dante's gaze moved over the kitchen counter. There were 3 small containers lined neatly beside the stove, each labeled in careful handwriting. Monday broth, Tuesday stew, Wednesday rice. He had not seen them before, or perhaps he had seen them and not understood them. Beside them stood a jar holding bay leaves and dried rosemary. The dish towel had been folded with exact corners. The back window latch, which used to stick, now closed smoothly. He saw more as he stood there. The loose curtain hem had been repaired. A chipped plate had been moved to the bottom of the stack so his parents would not use it first. Carlo's cane leaned by the wall with a strip of new rubber fitted to the end. Invisible work, the sort that changed a house without asking to be noticed. Something hard shifted inside him. He had spent years protecting this home from men with guns, bad deals, false friends, and hungry rivals. He had placed guards outside, cameras inside. He had paid doctors, drivers, and cleaners. Yet the person who had most gently held the place together had been the one he treated like a suspect. He looked down at the labels on the containers until the handwriting blurred. Where is she? He asked at last. Rosa gave him the address without making him ask twice. It was in the East Quarter, beyond the old rail line where the city grew narrower and less polished. A district of tired brick, laundries with flickering signs, cracked stairwells, cheap cafes, and windows that learned to hold the cold because no one could afford to let it in. Dante had owned warehouses near there once. He had moved men and money through those streets in years past. He had never thought much about the people who lived above the bakeries and behind the shuttered stores. Now he drove there himself after midnight. The rain had thinned to a drifting mist. Street lamps cast weak orange circles on wet pavement. Trash bins shone darkly in alley mouths. Cats moved like smoke along walls. His car looked too expensive for those streets. Too polished. Too black. like a piece of another world drifting through this one by mistake. He told the driver to wait, and went in alone. The building smelled of boiled cabbage, damp plaster, and radiator heat that never quite reached the top floor. The stairs were narrow. The paint on the rails had worn through to bare metal. Somewhere a baby cried behind a door and was hushed. Somewhere a television muttered in another language. Every step upward made Dante more aware of the weight of his coat, the quality of his shoes, the absurd cost of the watch hidden at his wrist. Sophia's apartment was on the 4th floor. There was no answer when he knocked. He stood there for several seconds, listening to the hollow quiet behind the door. Then an old woman in a sweater and headscarf opened the apartment across the hall 2 inches and peered out. "You're not from here," she said at once. "No." She looked him over with fearless, practiced judgment. Rich coat, good shoes, dangerous stillness. A man like that did not climb 4 flights for no reason. "You're looking for Sophia." "Yes. She went to evening mass." The woman's gaze sharpened. "Or maybe to sit where it's quiet. Depends on the day." Dante inclined his head once. "St. Agnes?" The old woman nodded, then softened a little in spite of herself. "She's had a hard week." Dante knew better than to ask direct questions. Yet the building and the hour and the old woman's open suspicion worked on him strangely. "She helps my parents," he said. The woman's face changed. "So you're him." Dante did not ask which him she meant. There was only one answer. "She never wanted anything from your family," the woman said before he could speak. "In case that's why you came." He looked at the closed apartment door. Why did she help them? The old woman's eyes moved past him for a second, as if seeing a different hallway in another year. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its edge. Because after her own parents died, she did not know where to put all that care. She folded her arms tighter against the cold. Her mother was sick for a long time. Then her father broke after. Not all at once. Quietly. Sophia looked after both until there was nothing left in the apartment but medicine bottles, laundry, and silence. Some people get angry after loss. Some people go numb. Sophia became useful. It is how she survives. The hallway seemed to narrow around him. The old woman continued, perhaps because his face showed nothing and she mistook that for needing more proof. "She met your mother at the pharmacy," she said. "Your mother could not reach the cough syrup on the high shelf. The 2 of them started talking. Then your father needed help with bags on the steps. Then one thing became another. That is all. Nothing strategic. Nothing criminal. No inheritance scheme. No hidden debt to collect. No revenge with a soft face. Only grief looking for a place to land." Dante thanked her, though the words felt too small, and left the building with the cold pressing sharp against his skin. He should have gone home. Instead, he told the driver to take him to St. Agnes. The church sat in a narrow square where rainwater shone between broken stones. It was small and older than the district around it, with soot-dark walls and wooden doors scarred by time. A single candle flickered in a side window. The rest of the square was empty, except for a flower seller's stall folded up for the night and a sleeping dog curled beneath a bench. Inside, the church was dim and smelled of wax, damp wool, and old prayer. Dante removed his gloves and moved quietly along the aisle. The sanctuary lamps burned low. Shadows held the corners. Rows of dark wooden pews stretched ahead in calm order. Near the front, beneath a side statue of the Virgin, one figure sat alone. Sophia. She wore the same gray coat. Her hands were clasped in her lap. Her head was bowed, but not in dramatic sorrow. She looked tired beyond speech, tired in the bones. The kind of tired that comes after holding oneself together too long. Dante stopped halfway down the aisle. For a moment he simply watched. Not because he was spying now. Not because he needed one more hidden observation. But because something in him no longer knew how to enter quiet honestly. At last Sophia lifted her head and saw him. Her expression did not harden right away. It did something worse. It closed, not angry, wounded, guarded by pain. She stood. "I'm sorry," Dante said before she could speak. The words sounded strange in the church. Too heavy for the air, too late for the room. Sophia looked at him without moving. "You came a long way to say 2 words. "Yes." That seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. Perhaps because she heard truth in it. Rain whispered against the stained glass window. Somewhere near the altar, a candle gave a soft crackle. Dante took one step closer. "No more. I thought you wanted access," he said. "To the family, to the house, to something beyond kindness. I thought there had to be a price hidden underneath it. And now? He swallowed once, though the movement was barely visible. Now I think I have spent too many years looking at people the wrong way. Her face changed, just a little. Not forgiveness. Not yet. He looked at the floor between them. The stone was worn smooth by decades of feet. I went to your building. Sophia's fingers tightened around each other. Your neighbor spoke to me, he said. Only a little. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a door he had no right to open further. Yet he had come for truth and could not turn away from it now. Is it true? He asked quietly. About your parents? For several seconds she did not answer. Then she sat again, not in surrender but because some griefs could only be spoken from a seated place. Dante remained standing until she gave the smallest motion toward the pew beside her. He sat. The wood creaked under his weight. Up close he could hear her breathing, slow at first, then less steady. My mother was ill for 3 years, she said. At the end she needed help with everything. Eating, washing, turning in bed. My father tried, but he was proud and clumsy and afraid of doing things wrong. So I learned. She looked ahead at the altar lamp. I learned medicines. Broth, how to sleep lightly, how to hear the difference between pain and panic in another room. Her voice stayed level, but he could feel how carefully it was being held. When she died, the apartment went quiet in a way I had never imagined. My father sat in the kitchen and stared at her chair for days. He stopped caring whether he ate. He stopped shaving. He stopped opening the curtains. A small, tired smile touched her mouth and vanished. I took care of him too. Less because he needed a nurse and more because he did not know how to live after losing her. Dante stared straight ahead. He lasted 11 months, Sophia said. After that, every room felt wrong. The church seemed even stiller. I kept cooking the things they liked, she went on. I still bought enough for 3 by accident. I still woke up listening for voices that were gone. Then one day at the pharmacy, your mother asked me whether this cough syrup was better than the other one. And your father complained that all modern medicine tasted like sweet glue. And for a second, she stopped, pressing her lips together. For a second, it felt familiar. Not the same, never the same, but familiar enough that helping them made the silence smaller. Dante turned his head then. There were tears in her eyes, though she had not let them fall. That was when something inside him finally broke. Not loudly, not with a speech, not with the kind of collapse cinema liked to sell. It was worse because it was real. A slow, helpless shattering of the thing he had used for years to stay intact. He had watched her through hidden cameras and seen performance where there had been grief. He had tested her with money and insult and temptation, and each time she had answered with dignity while he answered with suspicion. He had stood outside his parents' warmth and called it protection while she stepped inside their loneliness and called it care. His throat tightened painfully. I'm sorry, he said again, but now the words carried the full ruin of it. I am so sorry. Sophia looked at him, and perhaps she saw then that he was no longer speaking from pride. Dante dropped his gaze to his hands. They had signed threats, lifted guns, counted envelopes, fixed borders, ended arguments, strong hands, controlled hands. They were shaking. A tear fell before he could stop it. Then another. He bowed his head, one hand covering his mouth, and for the first time in years he let grief and shame move through him without fighting them. Not only grief for what he had done to her, not only shame for the tests. There was older grief in it too. Years of distance from his parents, years of turning love into surveillance because surveillance was easier, years of becoming a man who no longer recognized goodness unless it came with a contract. When Sophia spoke, her voice was softer than before. I did not help them to hurt you. I know. I never wanted anything from your family. I know. A long silence passed. Then Dante lifted his head and looked at her with the nakedness of a man who no longer had any use for disguise. But I want to do something now, he said. Not to pay you off, not to erase what I did. I don't think that can be erased, but to help, if you'll let me. She studied him carefully. He did not blame her. In the weeks that followed, change came quietly. Dante did not try to force his way into her forgiveness. He began where he had failed most clearly. He went to his parents' house in daylight. He stayed through meals. He listened to the story of Naples when it rained. He learned where the tea was kept without asking a servant. He sat with Carlo in the study and let the old man criticize his choices in business and life with equal honesty. He drove Rosa to the doctor himself twice, shocking both guards and driver. He arranged secure housing for Sophia, but this time he did not send an anonymous offer through hidden channels. He told her plainly that he wanted her to have a home where the heat worked and the stairs were not dangerous. She resisted at first. Eventually, she accepted only when he agreed to place it in her name and expect nothing in return. Then, in memory of her parents and his own, he funded a neighborhood meal program near St. Agnes. Not one of his polished charity fronts. A real kitchen, real tables, hot food for the old, the lonely, and the forgotten. He named it after no one living. On the first night it opened, Sophia stood beside Rosa in the serving line while Carlo grumbled that the bread should have been sliced thicker. Dante served soup. The final dinner came a week later at the old house. No guards in the kitchen, no hidden tension, rain on the windows, candlelight on the table because Rosa said electric light made supper feel sad in winter. Carlo in his cardigan, Rosa in pearls. Sophia in a dark blue dress she had nearly refused to wear because she said it was too fine, though it was simple and modest. Dante at the stove, sleeves rolled, trying to follow one of his mother's recipes badly enough that everyone had to stop him and help. The room filled with voices. Small ones. Human ones. At one point, Sophia rose to adjust the shawl on Rosa's shoulders and turn Carlo's plate because his wrist was stiff. It was such a little thing, barely a movement. But Dante saw it, and this time he understood it fully. Not strategy. Not advantage. Love with nowhere else to go. Finding a home. He stood for a moment with the serving spoon in his hand and looked at the three of them in the warm kitchen light. His father grumbling, his mother smiling, Sophia moving gently between them, and he felt tears threaten again. He did not hide them. Outside, the city remained what it had always been. Wet streets, guarded doors, black cars under stone arches. Smoke, money, power, and danger, moving in elegant silence. But inside the old house, another kind of power had taken root, quieter and harder to command. Dante had spent half his life believing control was the strongest form of love. Now, in the candlelit kitchen of his parents' home, with soup steaming on the table and shadows soft on the walls, he finally understood the difference. And for the first time in many years, he did not stand outside it. He sat down and stayed.